All right, turn the page in your notes to the parallel teaching section, and you need this article out beside your desk. And as we are reading, we are going to underline the answers to these questions. So we're going to read the first paragraph and then answer the questions in the first box. This is the introduction to the Revolutionary War. I'm at the first paragraph. As the colonists took root, they grew used to mostly governing themselves. Great Britain decided it wanted more control. It, or Great Britain, began to force new taxes on the colonists. They wanted to raise money from the goods they were shipping to the colonies. In 1764, the British Parliament passed the Sugar Act to raise tax on sugar. The next year, the British Parliament passed the Stamp Act. Colonists now had to pay taxes for newspapers, marriage licenses, and all other legal documents. So if we go back to box 1, it says, why did Great Britain force the colonists to pay taxes? And we can underline in our text where it says they wanted to raise money for the goods they were shipping to the colonies. They wanted more money and they wanted more control. So in 1A, we would write, Great Britain wanted to raise money from the goods they were shipping to the colonies. Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready to keep reading. 1B says, how did the taxes affect the colonists? And if we go back in that paragraph, we know the Sugar Act and the Stamp Act was passed, and so the colonists now had to pay taxes not only on sugar, but also newspapers, marriage licenses, and other legal documents. And so we would write that down in 1B. The colonists had to pay taxes for sugar, newspapers, marriage licenses, and all other legal documents. Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready to keep reading. Let's keep reading in paragraph 2. Many colonists were angered by these taxes. They hadn't agreed to them and they felt they were illegal and unfair. Each new tax led to a bigger protest by the colonists. Besides taxes, many colonists were also unhappy about some of the rules the British were forcing on them. In 1765, the British Parliament passed the Quartering Act. The act stated that colonists had to agree to give British troops food and let them stay in their homes. Colonists who were unhappy with how the British were treating them decided to fight back peacefully. In 1765, the Stamp Act Congress met in New York. The Congress was made up of representatives from many colonies. The representatives agreed to boycott British goods until the Stamp Act was repealed. If we stop right there and go to the bottom, we know these words are in bold and the definitions are at the bottom. So boycott means to refuse to buy something. So the representatives refused to buy anything that was made in Great Britain until the Stamp Act was repealed or done away with. That same year, the Sons of Liberty, a secret organization of colonists in favor of liberty, was formed. Let's stop right there and go to box 2. How did the colonists respond to the taxes? Well, we know that they were angry and that they continued to protest because they were being treated unfairly by the British government. So in 2A, we would write, the colonists protested the taxes and decided to peacefully fight back against the unfair treatment from British Parliament. Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready for box 2B. 2B says, how did the colonists peacefully fight against the unfair treatment of the British government? And if we go down to the third paragraph, it talks about how they formed a Congress and the representatives at the Congress decided to boycott British goods until the Stamp Act was repealed. So in box 2B, we would write, the colonists formed a Congress and decided to boycott British goods until the Stamp Act was repealed. Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready to keep reading. We're at paragraph 4. Tensions grew between the colonists and the British. In 1770, tensions erupted with the Boston Massacre. British troops in Boston found themselves confronted by a crowd of angry colonists. The crowd shouted at the troops and threw snowballs and other small objects at them. The soldiers panicked. One soldier started firing his gun. Then more soldiers fired into the unarmed crowd. 5 colonists were killed and 6 were injured. The British government was afraid of losing control over the colonies. They removed all the taxes on imports to make the colonists happy. Let's stop right there. Why did the colonists in Boston confront the British troops? We have the spot that says that they did confront the troops, and if we go back into paragraph 2, it tells us that Parliament passed the Quartering Act, and the soldiers were allowed to live in the colonists' homes, and they had to feed them. So the colonists were forced to let the British soldiers into their homes and to take care of them. And that could be why they were angry at the British soldiers. And so in 3A, we would write, the Boston colonists confronted the British soldiers because they were angry that they were living in their homes and enforcing the king's taxes. Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready for 3B. It says, why did Parliament repeal all of the taxes except the one on tea? And if we go down to the bottom of the first page, it says, the British government was afraid of losing control over the colonies, which is why they removed all the taxes except the one on tea. So in 3B, we would write, the British government was afraid of losing control over the colonies. Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready to keep reading. We'll continue reading our text in box 4. I'm going to continue reading at the bottom of the page where it says the British government. Silently track the page. The British government was afraid of losing control of the colonists. They removed all the taxes on imports to try to make the colonists happy. Turn the page. They allowed, however, one tax to remain in place for tea. In 1773, Parliament passed the Tea Act to help get the East India Company out of financial trouble. This act enabled the British Trading Company to sell tea in America at a low price. Even with the tax on tea, the British company had a price advantage over American tea companies. The colonists were furious. They feared East India's tea would put American tea companies out of business. In Boston, a leader of the resistance named Samuel Adams decided to protest. He spoke to a group of colonists on December 16, 1773, at the Old South Church in Boston. Shortly after he spoke, a large group of men boarded British ships and dumped thousands of pounds of East India's tea into the harbor. Crowds of onlookers gathered to celebrate the rebellious act. They nicknamed the event the Boston Tea Party. So we'll stop right there because we have our answer for 4A. Why did the tax on tea anger the colonists? And if we go back into this paragraph where it tells us the colonists were furious, then it gives us the reason why. They feared East India's tea would put American tea companies out of business. Silently write down your answer in 4A. Press pause to write down your answer and play when you are ready to keep reading. We're going to keep reading where it says the British responded. The British responded quickly and harshly. In 1774, they passed several measures known as the Intolerable Acts. They closed the Boston port and made it difficult for a major city to function. Other colonies, especially Maryland, helped Boston survive by sending food and supplies. All of these events had two main consequences. First, they made the colonists resent Britain. British government seemed far away and out of touch with the colonists' needs. Many colonists began to think about ruling themselves. Second, they helped unite the colonies. The colonists had come to the New World with very different backgrounds and lifestyles. They were sprawled across the east coast of this big continent, but Britain's acts gave them a single purpose and a common cause: justice and liberty. In September 1774, the first meeting of the First Continental Congress took place. Representatives of 12 of the American colonies met to discuss how they would unite and defend their rights as men. Within months, the Revolutionary War would begin. Less than 2 years later, on July 4, 1776, America would declare its independence. Box 4B says, what were the consequences of the colonists' actions towards Great Britain? And if we go back in this paragraph, it tells us two consequences. First, they made the colonists resent Britain. Second, they helped unite the colonies. Silently write that down in 4B. Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready for the paragraph. For the paragraph, it tells us, how did the American colonists respond to taxation without representation from the British Parliament? And you need to go back in your notes and figure out how they responded to the taxes and what this reveals about them as people.